Hi there grade 12s, welcome back. So in this section of the lesson we're going to look at some questions and answers to do with the brain, the spinal cord and nerves or neurons. Okay, remember in the last lesson we took a look at the structure of the brain and we spoke about the functions of different parts of the brain. We looked at the structure of the spinal cord, and we also spoke about the different types of nerves, and we said that you have the sensory neuron, connector neuron and motor neuron. So let's have a look at these questions and start answering them. Now you're very likely to get questions very similar to this in future tests and exams, so make sure to pay attention. So on this slide here it says write down the part of the brain that contains the centers that control balance, muscle tone and equilibrium. Now we did mention which part of the brain does this in our lesson. So what was it? Can you remember the name? Okay, the correct answer for that was the cerebellum. So I hope you got that right. Okay, the second question. Write down the part of the brain that has centers that interpret what you see. So in our lesson we did say that there is a part of the brain which processes all the information, all the sensory information we receive. Can you remember what that part of the brain was called? Okay, that's correct. The cerebrum. Okay, number 3. Coordinates voluntary muscle movements. Okay guys, so we've got to think now and we think back. We did speak about this in the lesson again. So write down the part of the brain that coordinates voluntary muscle movements, and we should remember that the part of the brain that is responsible for this is again the cerebellum. Okay, and then number 4, write down the part of the brain that controls body temperature. What part of the brain is responsible for controlling body temperature and also controlling everything else that the body needs to maintain homeostasis? Okay, hopefully you said the hypothalamus. Okay, so very quick, easy ways to pick up marks for these very simple questions and answers. Okay, so on this slide, question 1 says, and they're asking you for definitions here, obviously. A structure which receives a stimulus and converts it into an impulse. What do we call one of these structures or one of these organs? Like our eyes, ears, our tongue, our nose. What do we call those? Okay, they are sensory organs. Okay. Number 2, a structure which responds to a stimulus. For example, a muscle or gland. Okay, what do we call these ones? Okay, they are effector organs. Okay. Number 3, a neuron that carries impulses from the central nervous system, our brain and spine, to the effectors. Now remember we spoke about 3 different types of neurons. So which one is this? Is this a sensory neuron, connector neuron or motor neuron? Hopefully you guys said a motor neuron. Okay, number 4, a neuron that carries impulses from the receptors or the sensory organs to the central nervous system. Again, we have our sensory neurons, connector neurons, and motor neurons. Which one of those carries information from our sensory organs or receptors to the central nervous system? These would be the sensory neurons. Okay, then number 5. A neuron that carries impulses from a sensory neuron to a motor neuron in the spinal cord. Again, sensory neuron, connector neuron, or motor neuron. Which one of those? It'll be a connector neuron. Number 6, a very quick automatic action that involves the spinal cord and not the brain. Okay, so remember we said that some actions, such as your heartbeat and other things, don't send impulses all the way to the brains. They get processed in the spinal cord. And what do we call these kind of actions? Okay, those would be an involuntary action. Okay, then number 7, the pathway along which an impulse is transmitted to bring about a response to a stimulus during a reflex action. We're going to talk about this a bit more in the future, but the pathway that an impulse takes through from our sensory organs, through the sensory neurons, into the connector neurons, into the motor neurons, to the effector organs, that is called a reflex arc. Remember that word because we're going to speak about it a bit more later on. Okay, so now we have been given a diagram of a neuron. We haven't been told what kind of neuron this is, and we've got all the parts of the neuron here labeled A to F. Now the first question says, list parts labeled A to F. So what we've got to do is we have a look at all A, B, C, D, E, and F, and we have to name those parts. We have to give the proper name for those parts of the neuron. So let's start off with A. A is pointing at the central part that runs through this neuron. Now, this part does have a special name that we spoke about in our lesson. Can you remember what part A is called? If you said axon, well done, okay? That is the axon of the neuron. Now, if we have a look at B, B is pointing to a gap between two special cells that surround neurons. Okay, so B isn't asking what we call those specialized cells. It's asking what is the gap or the node. There's a clue. What is the gap or node between those two specialized cells? Okay, guys, I hope you said it is the node of Ranvier. Now number C is asking, what do we call those specialized cells that insulate the axon to make sure that the impulses carry on traveling along the axon? Okay, guys, hopefully you said that number C then is a Schwann cell. Number D, okay, this is the main part, if you want to call it that, of the cell. Okay, it contains the nucleus and the nucleolus and many of the cell organelles. What do we call that part? Okay, hopefully you said that's the cell body. Okay, now E is again pointing at one of these Schwann cells, but it's asking you what is the name of that covering, the thing that covers the outer layer of these Schwann cells. Okay, hopefully you can remember this. It's called a myelin sheath. And the last thing that we have to name in this diagram are the branches at the end of the neuron. Okay, in a motor neuron, these attach into the muscles or effector organs. In sensory neurons, these are attached to the sensory organs, or in both they can attach to other nerve cells or neurons. What do we call those little branches? Okay, they are called dendrites. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, the next question then says, what kind of neuron is this? And give a reason for your answer. Now remember, in our lesson we spoke about motor neurons and interneurons or connector neurons, and we also spoke about sensory neurons, and we took a closer look at the structure of a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. Can you remember what one of the main differences between a motor neuron and a sensory neuron were? Hopefully you said the position of the cell body. Remember, motor neurons have the cell body along the axon towards one end of the cell, close to the dendrites. The sensory neurons, on the other hand, have it branching off the axon towards the middle of the neuron. So we have a look at this picture here and we say, where is the cell body located? And hopefully from looking at this picture you can see that we are talking about a sensory neuron. Okay, let's go on to the next slide and have a look at those questions. Okay, so this slide shows us a diagram of a human brain, and all the parts are unlabeled. They are just labeled A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, question 1 says, list the parts labeled A to F. So this question is very similar to the one that we looked at to do with the parts of the neuron, except now we're looking at the parts of the human brain. So let's start with part A. This is the largest part of the brain, and we call that the cerebrum. Now, the brain has two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere, and they are connected by part B. Can you remember what we called part B? Okay guys, hopefully you said the corpus callosum. Part C lies underneath the larger part of the brain, towards the back of the brain there, and that is called the cerebellum. It's very easy to get confused between the cerebrum and the cerebellum because the names are so similar, so make sure you know the difference. Okay, part D is the hypothalamus. Part E is the medulla oblongata. And then part F extends all the way down from in the brain down into the spinal cord, and that is a gland known as the pituitary gland. Okay, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. And remember, if you want more questions and answers, you want to practice, you want to get more experience, you want to see the kinds of questions you're going to be asked in future exams and tests, feel free to visit the IWIS website at www.iwis.co.za. There you can find worksheets to help you along with more questions that you can practice. Guys, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys again very soon.
We need to learn to live with the COVID virus, you know, the new normal, at least for the next few months. And we have just what you need to make sure you never miss a single school lesson. And it's absolutely free, mahala! High quality, powerful, animated lessons for all your subjects. So don't spend a cent until you have tried IWIS. It's everything you need. All video lessons, textbooks, workbooks, exam prep. We want you to ace 2021.